Hey everyone, good to see you here. Listen, it's late. It's really late. I know. I'm a night person. I'm sorry. But if you are able to be here with me right now in this moment at this midnight hour, then I just want to humbly thank you from the bottom of my heart because this is late. If you're not able to be here right now in this present moment, then I want to thank you for catching the replay. And it is my prayer that you are blessed by today's topic of presence. So I want to ask, is it okay if I talk with you just a moment about presence? We look at things like, what is presence? Does presence make us a better listener? Because I'm striving to become a better listener myself and to be fully present in this moment, fully present when I'm before others, I would like to share with you tonight, at this midnight hour, my study on presence. So as we prepare to do this, as we did in our last video, I want you to just take a moment, rub your ears, pull on them, kind of massage them inside and out, gently pulling them away from your head. Now, I don't want you to bring pain. I just want you to massage them. And it's better if you do it yourself than have someone else because you're aware of the amount of pressure that you're applying. Now, the reason that we are doing this is because it brings our energies into balance and it opens us up to a better understanding of what we are hearing. In other words, this little practice helps us to be present in the moment. It helps us to understand the lessons that we're hearing and to walk in that understanding, to fully receive that understanding. So, if you didn't do it with me, pause the video, take a moment, rub your ears. So, now that we've done that, imagine, if you will, the way that it would feel not to feel hurried or rushed, not to feel like you're superior or inferior to another, and that it's all right to allow another person to be the expert or the superstar, the shining star. How does that feel? When you close your eyes and you're imagining it, how does that feel to you? Does it bring peace? Does it bring calmness? Does it bring joy to you? These are the kind of things that we are going to look at as we look at presence today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Regina Sanders. I am a life, business, and health coach. I received my accreditation through IACCC. I'm a survivor of stage 3 colon cancer, an author, a speaker, a mother, wife, minister. It is this journey through the valley of shadow of death with stage 3 colon cancer and coming out victorious that led me to where I am today. Because it is, it is this journey that taught me to receive from God and from others. And it is this journey that allowed me to say, I'm going to live my best life. God has given me a second chance at life, and I'm moving in there. I'm living my best life. But not only am I going to live my best life, I'm going to take others with me. I'm going to help them live their best life. Now, in South Carolina, where I'm located, you don't have to have accreditation to be a life coach. So the whole idea behind me getting accredited was a decision that I made when I decided to live my best life. Then I had to honor the value that I saw in myself. And the way that I chose to honor that value was through investing in myself to become an accredited life coach. Because if I could not invest in the value in myself, then I certainly couldn't expect others to. But also, if I could not invest in the value of myself, then therefore I couldn't fully see that value in myself or in others. And it is my purpose, it is my goal today to bring value to you, to add value to you, and to help you see the value in you that God sees in you. It never fails. Y'all, I start a video and my animals get wild. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'll be right back. I'm going to let this crying kitty outside. Not you, Chanel, because you've already been out. Get back, Chanel. Get back. Kitty, go. So I do apologize for that interruption. However, Kitty was insistent he needed to go outside. He is an indoor-outdoor kitty. So I want to thank you right now for sharing your valuable time with me as we delve into presence. So what is presence? Presence is something that we all want, because when we see it, we can also feel it. A person walks into a room and some people don't even turn their head and notice. And then another person walks into the same room and it seems as if the whole room just kind of shifts and turns in their seat, and the attention goes to this person that walked in, and we say, that person has presence. So what I've discovered about presence is very simple. Presence is a result of confidence. Presence is a result of confidence. And confidence can be felt even before it's ever expressed. So when people come and say, I would like to have great presence, I would like to be a leader that people notice and that people want to follow, what I tell them is it always begins with confidence. So what is one way that we increase our confidence or increase our presence? It's by raising our self-awareness. Now some may go, no, we're not supposed to be self-aware. That's being too self-focused. There is a difference in self-awareness and self-focus, as we're going to learn here today. I want to share with you a quote that has been very near and dear to my heart. And it says, humility brings grace to our need, and grace alone can change our hearts. Humility, therefore, is the substructure of transformation. And that's by Frangipane. So what does it mean to be self-aware? How do we become self-aware enough to understand our own shortcomings in the listening category, but not become self-focused and sabotage our efforts to become better listeners? Self-awareness is not something that I hear discussed in the Christian world very often, but I believe it's important, because Jesus was very self-aware. He knew who he was, and he knew why he was here, why he had become. So what does it mean to be self-aware? So let's keep things simple. To be self-aware means that you are aware of what's going on in your heart, how you're coming across to others, and where you might need to change. In other words, self-awareness is equal to righteous judgment. You have a humble view of yourself, and you recognize that you're not perfect. No matter how much we strive to be, none of us are perfect. So why is it important to be self-aware? Well, because, in a nutshell, God's primary agenda in your life is to change you so that you become more like Jesus. And you find that in Romans chapter 8, verse 29. How can you cooperate with Him if you're not aware of your weaknesses and your strengths? See, I believe it's a heart issue. Solomon instructed, from a wise mind comes wise speech, in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 23, and that's from the New Living Translation. Jesus echoed, excuse me, one moment. You are interrupting. Come here. No, don't run from me. Come here. Then you sit down and be quiet. I'm sorry. She's being sassy tonight. So Jesus echoed the writer of Proverbs and said, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." We find that in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, English Standard Version. If you don't know what's going on in your heart, you're liable to mess up with your mouth. And I would also like to suggest that if you don't know what's going on in your heart, you won't be able to listen well. Come here. This is our little noisemaker. This is Ava. I think she wants to teach tonight's lesson. So, it's my conviction that in order to grow in our ability to listen to others, we've got to become self-aware. And that, my friend, takes a humble heart. So understanding what's in your heart can be a bit tricky, can it? Our hearts hold love and hatred, fear and courage, altruism and egotism. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 teaches us that from the heart flows the springs of life, while Jeremiah teaches us that the heart is deceitful in chapter 17, verse 9. It's easy to go through the whole day and be unaware of the issues you've got going on in your heart until, bam, you open your mouth and those issues come flowing out, and then you realize that you're not listening. It's impossible to be a good listener without developing a humble spirit. Think about it. When you're listening and fully engaged, you allow the other person to have all the attention. Listening forces you to lay aside your agenda. It challenges you to let go of your need to share your opinions, theories, and assumptions in favor of listening to another's feelings, thoughts, and sentiments. That decision can only come from a heart of humility. So let's understand what humility is. Humility starts with self-awareness. Understanding both your weaknesses and your strengths, you're able to commit to personal growth. The idea of growing in our strengths feels exciting. It gets us on fire. But growing in the personal growth area of our weaknesses, nah, that's not so much exciting, because change often means pain. If we're going to become listeners, the listeners that God wants us to be, we've got to be able to admit our weaknesses. We have to. Only as we are brave enough to face the truth about our weaknesses can we cooperate with God in the transformation process that He envisions for our lives. Did you hear what I just said? Only as we are brave enough to face the truth about our weaknesses can we cooperate with God in the transformation process He envisions for our lives. Not the one we envision, but the one He envisions for our lives. Now, humility is not an extreme. And if you've ever heard me teach, then you've likely heard me say this before. Humility is not the opposite of conceit, which would be self-effacement, but rather stands between conceit and self-effacement. Humility is not an extreme quality, but rather a balanced, moderate, accurate understanding of yourself that you act on in your life. Arrogance has this insatiable appetite for space. Arrogance wants all the space. It claims it, it occupies it, it sprawls out like a child laying on the couch and not wanting his brother or sister to come sit beside him. This is my space. Or they're in the back seat together. You know how that is? You've had little ones. He's touching me. He's touching me. And the other one's going, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. You remember those arguments? That's a form of arrogance. Arrogance wants all of the space, the entire space, and it ends up suffocating others. Every statement of arrogance begins with I. Now, the opposite extreme is self-debasement. It's shrinking from occupying any space whatsoever. It retracts meekly inside of itself. So think about a park bench. You're walking in the park, there's this park bench, and there's a stranger sitting on that park bench. Now, he's not sitting on the edge to where he's falling off, but he's not sitting in the middle sprawled out. There is enough room on that bench for both you and this stranger. What are you going to do? Are you going to sit down, or are you going to shrink back and you're going to say, it's not enough room for me? That's too close to others. That's a form of self-debasement. Now, with self-debasement, the statements that self-debasement makes would never dare to begin with I. Although, in fact, if we listen carefully, all of them do. Because whether we see ourselves as nothing or as everything, we are still preoccupied with the self. And both of these traits are therefore forms of narcissism. Oftentimes we think it's real easy to point out a narcissist, but all of us, when out of balance, contain are vessels of the very same narcissism that we identify in others. See, God wants to see Christ-like humility developed in our lives. He wants us to become more like His Son, Jesus, whose whole life spoke the message of humility. The Apostle Paul wrote that to be like Jesus, we're to clothe ourselves in humility. That's Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. So putting on humility might seem a bit weird to us because, we dress to project an image that speaks significance and confidence. I mean, who doesn't appreciate the killer outfit that builds your confidence, right? But Paul's not bashing our choices of clothing. He's actually suggesting that we invest in our clothes. We also purposefully, I read that all wrong. He's actually suggesting that just as we invest in our clothes, we also purposefully invest in cultivating an attitude of humility. So it's like taking off the old man, putting on the new man. And since our hearts are so complicated, what does it look like to develop humility? So in order for us to fully understand and get this picture in our mind of what it looks like to develop humility, let's go back to Jesus. Jesus was important in every sense of the word. He had every reason to be the expert and to never listen to anyone. But that's not what He chose. Instead, He chose to humble Himself and become a servant. We see that identified in Scripture in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. He was completely self-aware, but He was not self-focused. And that's really important. Remember, I told you at the beginning of this video, there's a difference in self-awareness and self-focused. So Jesus was completely self-aware. He knew who He was and why He was here, but He wasn't self-focused. He's the one who said, I and the Father are one, as identified in John chapter 10, verse 30. His humility was wrapped up in His relationship with the Father, and He knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that He was deeply loved. So when you know that you're deeply loved, it's a whole lot easier to be humble. When I know God the Father completely and wholly loves me, I have dignity and worth as His beloved child. Because I am God's beloved child, I don't need to prove myself. I have worth. I don't need to be seen as the expert. Because God sees everything I'm going through and He understands it, I don't need that continual validation. Because God is attentive to my every breath, I don't need to be the center of attention. Because God fills me with courage, I don't need to operate out of fear in conversation. And because God is in control, I don't need to engage in power struggles. Think about those things. It's all because of God. All of our value, all of our worth, Everything, our confidence, is all because of God. Operating out of that secure core. And if you saw the last blog post, we did some strengthening exercises for our physical bodies that help strengthen the core to support the spine, because these muscles support your spine. And so we're operating out of that secure core, that strong core, not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. And operating out of that secure core, I'm able to let go of the need to be important and to defer to the opinions of others. I don't have to prove them wrong or assert that my opinion is the only right one. Instead, I allow others to be the center of attention without competing for the limelight. I don't have to be in that spotlight. I ask God to fill me with a sense of His love so that out of the overflow of a full heart, I let someone else be the star, because I value my relationship with that person. See, Jesus dressed Himself in humility because He prioritized His relationship with the Father and with us. His desire is that His dynamic and consuming love transforms us so that we can prioritize our relationships with others by adopting His same attitude. But that will take intentionality on our part. In order to humbly listen to others, we need to increase our self-awareness and then surrender our right and our desire to be the expert. Listen, my friend, leave the possum alone. Lay down. Grandma's critters are visiting. But, they made me forget what I was saying. In order to humbly listen to others, we need to increase our self-awareness and then surrender our right and desire to be the expert. Before I lose this thought again, I'm going to say it. My friend, every victory that I have ever encountered in my life has come through my willingness to surrender. And what is it that I'm surrendering? It's my desire to be in control. So that's what the flesh wants. The flesh wants to be in control. But God tells us in His Word that His ways are higher than our ways. We don't have the same understanding. He tells us not to lean into our own understanding or our own reasoning, but to lean into Him. And it's when we surrender that we encounter those victories. Excuse me again. Get away from the back door, now. So the best way that I know to become more self-aware is to learn the art of reflective listening. To learn the art of reflective listening. In other words, you're going to listen to your heart and figure out what's going on inside of it. Only then will you be able to change the old patterns of behavior. So what is it to listen to your heart? And, when I hear those words, listen to your heart, my mind immediately jumps back to the 80s. Yep, I'm sharing my age. And, in the song by Roxette, which I will not attempt to sing for you because that's not my talent. But, no, I'm not talking about this song from the 80s by Roxette. All joking aside, please understand that when I say listen to your heart, I'm also not saying do whatever your heart tells you to do. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying develop the practice of reflective listening so that you can understand more clearly what's driving your internal choices. As author and consultant John Savage writes, if you keep in touch with what is going on inside of yourself while you are listening, there is a better chance of guessing what is going on in the other. So be aware of your own inner condition. Develop the regular practice of doing an internal check by reflecting on what's in your heart. Reflective listening will help you find lurking motives such as jealousy, insecurity, and the quest for validation and power. Any one of those could easily sabotage your listening efforts, so it's important for you to become self-aware. So what does it look like to listen to your heart? What does it look like to do reflective listening? Well, this is what it looks like. Ask these questions. When I said, whatever it was you said, what response was I looking for? Now, think through some recent conversations that you've had with family, friends, neighbors, co-workers. And let me give you an example. Brielle is a mom of 3 young toddlers, and in the thick of parenting young children, and I've got some friends here that have the same situation. You're the mom of young toddlers. But Brielle often feels that she doesn't accomplish much. So the other day when her husband Derek got home from work and asked her how her day was, Brielle just unloaded. She rattled off this long list of activities that she had done. Well, that wasn't the answer Derek was looking for. He wasn't looking for that much detail. So as Brielle reflected back on the conversation and asked herself, what response was I looking for? She realized that she was hoping Derek would applaud her efforts and validate how challenging her day had been. She was looking for validation. So when I asked myself, what response was I looking for? It's helpful for me to first ask, what was I feeling at that moment? If I can name what I was feeling at that time, then it's usually a whole lot easier for me to identify what it was that I was looking for from the other person. So this 2-step process, what was I feeling, what was I looking for, helps me in many situations, and I believe truly that it will help you as well. The next question that we want to ask in reflective listening is, why did I respond that way? Now, you've heard me say before, why is a question that never gets answered in this realm. But when we are doing the self-reflective listening work, we can answer it. Now, when I say, why it's not answered in this realm, that's usually if we're questioning God about why something bad happened. Why did my friend lose her child? Why was that necessary? Why are people suffering with cancer? Those whys often aren't answered in this realm. We just have to lean into God and trust God in those situations. But when we ask, why did I respond that way? We can answer that why. So make a list of the people that are closest to you. And your list might include your parents, your spouse, your siblings, your children, grandchildren, friends, co-workers, and others, even strangers. As you consider each person on your list, reflect back on your most recent conversations with them. Did you offer unsolicited advice? Why did you do that? What motivated you to do that? And please note, if you are still actively parenting, you're going to need to give instruction to your children, and you're going to need to give advice to your children. Therefore, instead of evaluating if you gave advice, evaluate the method you used to give the instruction. So in that instance, ask, did the method I use feel like an attack to my child? Is there something different I might try? Here are a few other questions that you might consider. Were you fully present when those closest to you were talking? Or were you thinking through your to-do list? If you weren't fully present, why not? Were you continuously checking your email or social media? Why were you doing that? Was it a desire Was it a desire to be in the know or to stay connected so you don't feel lonely? Why is that so important to you? You might not even be aware that you're texting while you're talking. You'd be surprised at the number of people that aren't. So, and even if you're courageous enough, then I recommend that you even ask those on your list if they feel heard by you. And if they don't, then ask yourself what it is that you can do differently. The next question in reflective listening to ask yourself is, what fears have caused me to grow defensive in the past? What fear has caused me to grow defensive in the past? See, whenever you grow defensive in a conversation, it's driven by fear. And we know from 2 Timothy 1:7 that God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So it could be the fear of losing control, fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of not having a voice, or fear of not being respected. Whatever the fear, there's some part of you that feels threatened, and as a result, you begin to put up walls that are there to guard your heart. But the instant you become defensive, you're unable to listen effectively because you are instead defending your heart. What signals of stress and exhaustion do I need to recognize in myself in order to set better boundaries? Boundaries was a biggie for me. The early part of my adult life, I did not have the proper boundaries in place. And it was evident my life was a mess. Excuse me again. Chevelle, I'm not going to tell you again. Get over here and lay down. I apologize. They sound like little demon dogs, but I promise they're not. My life was a mess because I didn't have the proper boundaries in place. And guess what? That mess was making my kids' lives a mess. Yeah, it was affecting them. It was affecting my husband, my marriage. It was spilling out into other relationships because I did not have those proper boundaries in place. That's one reason I chose to invest in myself when I had the realization, God give me a second chance at life. Listen, you don't have to be near death to have that realization, because He's given you that second chance today without walking that same journey that I did. So, what signals of stress and exhaustion do you need to recognize in yourself in order to set better boundaries? I don't know anyone who listens effectively when they feel stressed or exhausted. And I want to share with you what I'm talking about. When our third child was born, Austin, he lived 16 days. But back up to when he was born. When he was born, he appeared to be this healthy little boy, a little on the low birth weight side, coming in at about 3 pounds. He was a little early, so, it was to be expected, but everything else seemed to be going well. So he had to spend some time in the NICU. Well, when he was 7 days old, I was notified by the pediatrician that they had detected a heart murmur, and he was going to need to be transferred to a children's hospital. And they transferred him even before I could get my family together to be there. It was that severe. Fear set in on me, and I became immediately stressed. I'm a mother. Something's wrong with my child, and I can't do anything about it. Those around me were trying to calm me down. They were telling me people live with heart murmurs every day. But in my heart of hearts, I knew it was something more severe than just a typical heart murmur. And it was. When we got to the hospital he had been transferred to, his cardiologist sat us down in this room and began to explain to us that the left side of his heart never developed. He had what they called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Now, at that time, there were very few survivors of this. And what this meant, again, the left side of his heart didn't develop. So open heart surgery wasn't going to repair this because the left side was completely missing. The only thing that would repair this was a heart transplant. Now, at 3 pounds, the likelihood of finding a heart for a child his size was next to zero. As the cardiologist started explaining this to us, I don't know how to describe what I felt. It was as if I was in this tunnel and I was getting further and further away from everyone, and I couldn't receive what she was saying to me. It was just bouncing off of me. It wasn't entering my ears. It was bouncing off of me, and I could not sit there. So I got up and I ran out of the room, and I went straight to the NICU, and the nurses were there going, we're not letting you in. And now at this point, I'm a grizzly bear. I'm a fighting woman. You're going to let me in, or I'm going to hurt somebody, because I'm going to my child. And the doctor had contacted them, called back to the NICU and told them to let me in without ever leaving the room. She sat there in the room with my husband and with my mother while my father chased after me. She just had the knowledge. She knew what my reaction was going to be. She'd seen it before. And so she called to the NICU and she told them, let her in, because I'm not going to be able to talk with her any further until she sees her baby, holds her baby, and has that comfort there. We were faced with some very hard decisions that had to be made in a short amount of time. So I was completely stressed, and I absolutely could not in any way hear what they had to say to me. And it put me in a defensive state. I was going to defend my child. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew if somebody tried to stop me, I was going to get in, if they tried to get in my way, it wasn't going to be a pretty sight. They wasn't going to know I knew Jesus, because that was my baby. So I went into that to say, again, I don't know anyone who listens well when they feel stressed. And it doesn't have to be that severe of a stress for you not to listen well. Any level of stress can affect your listening. I tend to talk faster and tune out what's going on around me when I'm stressed out. I get snappy and defensive when I'm tired. And that means that when there's deadlines that are piling up and I feel there aren't enough hours in the day, then I need to remember to pause. Practice the pause. Pray, stop, breathe, and ask Holy Spirit to help me retune into whatever it is that's happening around me. Now, I also know that exhaustion follows close on the heels of stress. So in order to avoid complete exhaustion, I need to set those proper boundaries in place around my schedule, around myself, so that I allow time for rest and renewal. Rest and renewal. And think about it. That is... excuse me again. Get away from that door. Chevelle. Do not make me tell y'all again. You almost made me jump out of the chair. I'm sorry. Again, I need to set boundaries around my schedule and my time and myself for rest and renewal. And that is the whole purpose of the Sabbath. Look, God invited Adam to participate in the rest and renewal from work that God did. Adam hadn't even done any work. But this rest and renewal is so important, so valuable that God invited Adam to that first, to the Sabbath. If I don't allow time for rest and renewal, whoever's talking to me is going to get ripped off because I'm only half present. I'm only half there. So admitting that we need rest is both humbling and holy. Again, think about the Sabbath. It forces us to admit that we cannot be the Savior to others. We just can't. I no longer wear the hat, Miss Fix-It, because I can't be that Savior. That's Jesus' job, and that's in a secured boundary. That's His holy space. So think of boundaries as setting aside holy space. Your schedule is a holy space. Yes, there's things that you need to get done within that schedule, but it's a holy space, so you can't allow others to encroach and invade and pick apart at it, or you have no time for rest and renewal. God has designed our bodies to need rest, period. When we prioritize rest and renewal, we are living in obedience to God's plan, and we create space in our hearts to be able to listen to others. It's very important. When we prioritize rest and renewal, we are living in obedience to God's plan, and we create space in our hearts to be able to listen to others. Even when Jesus lived on earth, He was bound by the limitations of a human body, and as such, He needed rest and renewal. And if He needed to set those boundaries, my friend, how much more do we? If Jesus, as fully God and fully man, needed that rest and that renewal, those proper boundaries in place, how much more do we need them? So as you become more self-aware, you'll feel a deeper desire for the attitude of Christ to be reflected in your listening. You'll become more willing to lay aside your stuff, whatever's going on in your life, to listen attentively, just as Christ would do, just as He does to you now. So I want to give you a call to action. I want to put our learning into action, our faith into action. So I have an assignment for you. We're going to practice listening to God first, because when we can hear God and understand what He's saying, then we can listen to others. So we're going to begin again with listening to God. In order to do that, I want you to read Psalm chapter 139, verses 23 and 24. Now, in these verses, David writes out a prayer to God, expressing his desire for God to help him examine his heart. So I want you to, in your journal, in your notebooks, write out these verses, but write them in your own words, expressing your desire for God to search out your heart and show you patterns of listening that He desires for you to change. And then sit quietly for 3 to 5 minutes. Doesn't have to be a great amount of time, just 3 to 5 minutes. Whatever you hear in your mind, is God bringing patterns to your mind? What patterns is He bringing to you? Write them down. Assume that God is speaking to you and ask Him to help you change. He's making you aware of these patterns. You're writing them down. Now ask Him to help you change. Ask Him to give you the instruction, the guidance, and the wisdom, the desire to make that change. So I thank you for being with me at this late hour. I have these notes prepared. I did notice some typos as I was looking over my notes that I didn't catch when I was editing earlier. So I ask you now to please excuse those and understand that I was rushing through. I felt the need to get this message out here, even at this late hour, at the midnight hour. I apologize for the interruptions of our wonderful fur babies, but grandmother has some wild critters, possums and raccoons, that come up on our back deck and eat sunflower seeds at night, and our dogs think they're protecting their boundaries. So they're protecting their boundaries, just as we have to do with the boundaries around rest and renewal. So, again, I thank you so much for being with me. Listen, I would like it greatly if you will contact me. In fact, if you will message me, if you would like to have a copy of these notes, a copy of the transcript here for today's message, send me a message, just, a personal message here with your email address. And I am so honored and privileged to get these out to you. And I thank you for being with me as we studied presence and being fully present and truly hearing others and living that life of humility as Jesus did. Excuse me. It is my prayer that this message has brought such value to me, to you. Yeah, I know it's brought value to me. I have thoroughly enjoyed studying it out today. But I pray that it has brought value to you as well. Share it with your friends. Share the Live Your Best Life page with your friends. If you've missed any of the previous postings, blog postings, such as the one I mentioned where we were looking at the exercises to strengthen your core to help support your spine, you can find those on my website, reginasanders.net. I encourage you to go there, visit, follow, contact me. You can contact me through that site. You can contact me on Facebook. You can contact me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm here. I'm available. And I look so forward to hearing from you. And I want to get these notes out to you. So send me your email in a personal message. Maybe I'll be able to put a link up that you can send it to me that way as well. But I want to get them to you. And I want to get them to you today. So until next time, my friends, God bless you. Rest well. Make this a time for your rest and renewal. And to God be the glory. Until next time.